Wait, if that's the real one, what is she wearing?
Oh no, look at his face. He just realized.
The first thing Naomi Ashby did on the morning of her 36th birthday was not open the card on her nightstand. She did not check the elaborate florist confirmation that had arrived on her phone at 7 a.m. She did not pour herself champagne or lie in bed smiling at the ceiling the way women do in movies when the world is treating them well. She went to work. There was something Naomi had understood for a long time that she had never been able to explain to anyone who hadn't lived it. That the people who see you most clearly are rarely the people closest to you. The people closest to you are often the ones most invested in seeing a particular version of you, the one that serves the story they're already telling. Strangers were sometimes more accurate. Employees, often. Her mother had been, always. Marcus had never seen her clearly. She understood that now in the way you understand things that were always true but required a specific amount of pain to become visible. He had seen a woman he could narrate, calm, agreeable, not challenging to his self-image, present at the right events in the right dresses with the right smile. He had loved the convenience of her. He had loved that she did not demand to be known. She had let him believe that was the whole of her. That was on her. She could own that. But she was done owning it quietly. The car that collected her from the Ashby townhouse was not the black family SUV Marcus kept for business appearances. It was a different vehicle entirely, a quiet, unmarked sedan registered under a corporate holding name that nobody in the Ashby household had ever thought to investigate. The driver knew her not as Mrs. Naomi Ashby, wife of Marcus Ashby, daughter-in-law of Clyde Ashby Sr., a man who'd spent 30 years building a real estate development company on borrowed prestige and carefully arranged silence. The driver knew her as Miss Voss. That was the name Naomi's mother had given her when she built her first workshop at the back of a rented garage in Charlotte, North Carolina, using her hands, her grandmother's tools, and a business plan she'd written in longhand on yellow legal pads because she couldn't afford a printer yet. Lorraine Voss had died before she saw what that workshop became. She died with calluses on her fingers and a small gold pendant around her neck that she'd made herself, a simple oval with a groove down the center, the way a river grooves stone. She'd pressed it into Naomi's hands the last time Naomi visited the hospital and said, "What you make with your hands outlasts everything they say about your name." That pendant now rested against Naomi's collarbone every day of her life, including today. Lumino's Fine Jewelry was not a small company. It was not a boutique brand or a niche luxury house. It was, by any serious financial accounting, one of the most powerful jewelry companies in the world, with flagship stores in 7 countries, royal commissions in 3, and a waiting list for its signature collection that stretched 18 months in every market. Fashion editors called it untouchable. Collectors called it essential. Clyde Ashby Sr. called it the standard by which all real wealth was measured, and said so loudly, at every dinner table, at every charity event, in every meeting where he wanted to sound like a man who understood refinement. He had no idea the woman he called, simple but sweet, at those same dinner tables owned it. Naomi had thought about telling Marcus many times. In the early years of their marriage, she had come close. A conversation half started over dinner, a business document left open on the coffee table, a moment at a gallery opening where someone nearly connected the name Voss to her face, and she'd simply redirected the conversation and gone home and sat with the almost of it for a long time afterward. But each time something had stopped her, not shame, not strategy, something quieter and more honest than either. She had wanted to know if he loved her, not Lumino's, not the corporate trusts and the acquisition power and the name that moved markets when it moved at all. Not the version of her that Clyde spent years trying to court through back channels, requesting meetings with Luminos's executive board, name-dropping them at his business club, telling anyone who'd listen that a family like his deserved a permanent relationship with a house like that. She had wanted to know if Marcus Ashby loved Naomi. She had her answer now. Inside Lumino's headquarters, the building was everything the Ashby family's real estate offices were not. Quiet, certain, self-possessed. The floors were pale ash wood. The walls held framed sketches from Lorraine Voss's earliest designs, protected behind museum glass. Rare archive pieces glowed in temperature-controlled cases along the corridor. There were no loud lobbies, no gold fixtures, no chandeliers screaming about their own expense. The beauty in this building did not need to announce itself. Neither did Naomi, Madame Voss. Renata Ellis, Naomi's chief of staff, was 51 years old, had been with Luminos for 14 years, and had a personal policy of delivering difficult information without softening it into something digestible. She fell into step beside Naomi the moment the elevator opened on the executive floor. Continuation flagged another mismatch in the retired series. Certificate number ending in 447. It's been listed against a diamond pendant in a third-party lender verification request, but our records show that number belongs to a sapphire brooch we restored in 2019. Who submitted the request? The lender's own desk, not a client. Naomi's pace did not change. Seal the file. No external access until we've run full authentication. Copy legal and risk. Already done. Renata paused. There's one more thing. She held out a single printed receipt. This came through the household expense portal this morning. Your house manager flagged it. It was charged to the shared account under Mr. Ashby's name. Naomi stopped walking. The receipt was from a seller called Larkin Vale Private Estate Sales. The description read, Lumino-style pendant necklace, estate certificate included. Lumino-style. Not luminous. That distinction was not an accident. Whoever had written that description knew exactly what they were doing. Naomi turned the receipt over once, slowly. Then she handed it to Renata. I want a quiet review on this vendor. Nothing that touches Marcus's phone or accounts directly. Keep Jerome copied. Jerome Adisa was Lumino's legal director, a man who'd spent 20 years structuring corporate protections and private trusts, and who understood the difference between a company matter and a personal one, and knew how to handle both without letting them contaminate each other. Understood. Renata hesitated. Today is your birthday, Madam Voss. Naomi looked at the receipt one more time, at the vendor name, at the casual wrong word, style, sitting there like a tell in a poker hand. I know, she said. Let's work. The party had been Marcus's idea. He had announced it 3 weeks ago at breakfast, with the particular energy of a man who has decided to do something generous and wants credit for. The decision rather than the execution. A birthday dinner at the Grand Oris Hotel ballroom. Charity component, a silent auction, proper cause, tax deduction, good optics. He had said it would give Naomi a proper night for once, which told her everything she needed to know about how he'd been interpreting their marriage. She had accepted graciously. She had even let herself hope briefly that it meant something. That hope ended at 4 p.m. when Renata appeared in the doorway of Naomi's private office, holding a tablet and wearing the expression she reserved for things that were going to hurt. The footage was from a licensed investigator Jerome had quietly retained 6 weeks ago after Naomi mentioned the hotel charges, the private calls Marcus was taking in hallways, the boutique receipts he explained away as client entertainment. The footage showed only public areas, lobby, elevator corridor, private lounge entrance. It was clean, it was legal, it was devastating. Marcus entering the hotel elevator with a woman named Simone Garrett, an investment consultant, a woman Naomi had met twice at charity functions. Simone leaning into Marcus's shoulder the way a person leans into a place they know well. Marcus's hand at the small of her back, guiding her toward the restricted suites. Naomi sat at her desk and watched it twice. She pressed her hands flat against the surface and held them there until the shaking stopped. In the second clip, shot from the public lounge entrance, Marcus and Simone stood near a glass wall with champagne, white orchids in Simone's hair. White orchids. Naomi had noted the florist misfiling that morning, a delivery of white orchids charged to Marcus's card and sent to Simone's address, listed under the birthday party event block as if a grieving oversight could cover it. It wasn't grief. It was carelessness. The specific carelessness of a man who has decided the woman he lives with does not pay attention. Renata's voice was steady. The investigator documented a partial conversation from the public lounge. He was seated at the next table. No audio device, just notes. Read it. Simone said, after tonight, she'll finally understand she was never his level. Marcus replied, she'll sign whatever I put in front of her once everyone sees it's already over. The silence in the office was complete. Naomi sat with the words for a long moment. Not, she'll be heartbroken. Not, she'll be angry. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her once everyone sees. He wasn't planning to leave a marriage. He was planning to leave a performance. He wanted an audience for her smallest moment so that the memory of it would keep her small for a long time afterward. She picked up her phone and called Adese Okonkwo. Adese was 60 years old, a former federal litigator turned private legal counsel, and had managed Naomi's personal legal affairs for 9 years. The prenuptial structures, the trust arrangements, the firewalls between Naomi Ashby and Naomi Voss that Adese had built with the care and precision of someone who understood that the two women would one day need to become visible to each other in a room full of people who'd assumed they were not the same person. Adese answered on the second ring. Tell me. Naomi told her everything. The footage, the receipt, the party, the plan. Daisy was quiet for 3 seconds. Don't confront him tonight. I know. Don't touch his devices. Don't access his private accounts. We do this clean. A pause. The prenup holds. He signed it because he thought you had nothing significant to protect. He was wrong about that in every possible direction. The infidelity clause activates. The public humiliation clause activates if he does what it sounds like he's planning. He doesn't know I own Luminos. No, another pause. Naomi, let him plan the party. Let him stand in that ballroom and perform for his audience. But I need an authentication expert on site who can examine whatever he brings and make the finding public without it looking staged. Naomi looked at the Larkinvale receipt on her desk. I think I know what he's bringing. She made the next call herself. Bernard Ossi was Luminos's senior forensic appraiser, a man who had authenticated jewelry for royal estates, major auction houses, and 3 different fraud investigations, and who wore the same reading glasses he'd worn since 2009 because he believed in things that lasted. Madame Voss, he said, the party tonight has a charity auction component, donated antique pieces requiring on-site valuation. She let the implications settle. I can attend as the appraisal consultant, he said, without needing more. No one will question it. Good. She paused. Bernard, the vendor on this receipt, Larkinvale Estate Sales. His voice changed. We've seen that name adjacent to 2 counterfeit investigations in the last 3 years. They work through estate language and private resale documentation. Very clean on the surface. And underneath, forged certificates that copy retired authentication formats, not perfect replications, close enough to fool someone who doesn't know what they're looking for but wrong in ways that matter. Naomi touched her mother's pendant. Tonight, she said, someone is going to present me with one of their pieces, in public, as a birthday gift. Bernard Ossi was quiet for a moment. Then tonight, he said, we find out what else they've been selling. Naomi closed her eyes. Through the office window, the city moved in indifferent and ongoing. Somewhere across it, Marcus was probably choosing his tie. Simone was probably checking her dress. Clyde was probably rehearsing the things he planned to say about refinement and legacy, and families like his deserving rooms, like the one he was about to walk into. None of them knew what room they were walking into. Real value does not need to shout, her mother had told her. Let your work speak before your name does. Tonight, both would speak at once. The Grand Oris Hotel ballroom looked exactly the way Marcus had intended it to look, which was to say it looked like an argument for his own taste. Tall white columns wrapped in soft greenery. Chandeliers that threw gold across everything beneath them. Tables dressed in cream linen with long-stemmed arrangements that must have cost 3 times what the flowers were worth because they came from the right supplier. A string quartet playing something classical and inoffensive in the corner. 200 guests who ranged from charity committee regulars to Clyde Ashby's business associates to people who had accepted the invitation because the Ashby name still carried weight in this city, at least publicly, at least tonight. Naomi arrived exactly on time. She wore a deep burgundy dress, simple in cut, intentional in the way only things made by people who truly understand beauty can be intentional. Her mother's pendant at her collarbone, her hair pulled back, no heavy jewelry, no declaration. She looked like a woman who had dressed for someone else's idea of an occasion and found a way to make it quietly hers. A Daisy was already in the room, positioned near the charity auction table with a leather portfolio and the calm, watchful presence of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the real business happened sideways. Bernard was nearby, reviewing the auction catalog for the donated antique pieces that genuinely required his attention before anything else did. Naomi found her chair at the head table. She accepted a champagne glass she did not drink from. She smiled at guests who approached, answered their questions about the charity component, thanked the people who wished her happy birthday. She was, to every eye in that room, the gracious wife hosting an elegant evening. She was also cataloging everything. Clyde arrived 20 minutes after the room filled, which was itself a performance. The man who enters after the audience is seated. He was 62, broad, loud in the particular way of men who have spent decades rewarding their own opinions with agreement. He moved through the room like a current, shaking hands, pausing at tables, lifting his glass at the charity display, and saying loudly to no one in particular, "You know who understands events like this? Fine jewelry. That house knows what quality is. Not what you wear to a party, what a room like this deserves." He looked briefly toward Naomi with the fond, faintly condescending smile he'd been giving her for 4 years. Naomi is lovely, of course. Simple taste, bless her, but sweet. Some women are decorative in other ways. The 2 men beside him laughed. Naomi touched her pendant and felt her mother's hands in her memory. Marcus came in with Simone at his side, not behind. not as a colleague entering separately, beside. Close enough that 3 different guests looked, then looked away, then looked back at Naomi to read her face. She gave them nothing to read. She watched Marcus cross the room toward her, with the ease of a man who has convinced himself that confidence and entitlement are the same thing, and she thought about the first time she'd seen him, at a gallery benefit 6 years ago, standing near a piece he clearly didn't understand but was pretending to consider, because someone important was watching. She had found that quality charming then. She understood now that it had always been the most honest thing about him. "Happy birthday," he said, kissing her cheek without quite touching it. "You look good." "Thank you," she said warmly, as if she meant it. Simone Garrett made her way through the room in a way designed to be noticed. A bronze dress that caught every chandelier, an ease of movement that spoke of a woman who had rehearsed this entrance. She introduced herself to guests as a family investment consultant, which was clean and untrue in exactly the ways it needed to be. She touched Marcus's arm too often. She laughed at remarks that weren't funny with the light, practiced laugh of a woman playing a role she expects to occupy permanently. Then Naomi saw the bracelet. It sat on Simone's left wrist, catching the chandelier light in a way that made Naomi's stomach pull before her mind caught up to why. The design, the specific curve of the metalwork, the relationship between the setting and the stone, was not public. It was not in any Luminos catalog, any editorial, any store window. It was pulled directly from an archive design sketch Naomi had approved for internal study 8 months ago. The sketch had never left the building. Not officially. Someone had copied it. Imperfectly, close enough for a person who didn't know to mistake it for the real thing, wrong enough for the person who'd drawn the original to know immediately that it wasn't. Naomi looked at Simone's bracelet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she looked away. A spoon struck a glass. Marcus stood near the center of the room with the particular posture of a man about to deliver something he's been rehearsing. Guests turned. The quartet stopped. A stillness settled over the room of the kind that happens when people sense, without being told, that something is about to shift. "Thank you all for being here tonight for my wife's birthday." Marcus's voice was warm and projected, the voice of a man performing warmth rather than feeling it. "I wanted to give Naomi something this year that finally," he paused for the timing of it, a tiny theatrical beat, "makes her feel like she belongs in a room like this one." Naomi heard the word, finally. She heard what it implied to every person in that room, that she had not until now been adequate to it. She kept her face soft and open. Marcus reached into his jacket and produced a black velvet box. He held it out toward her with the ceremony of a man presenting a verdict rather than a gift. Around them, guests leaned forward. Naomi accepted the box. She opened it. Inside was a necklace, gold links with a center stone, a familiar curve in the design, unmistakably gesturing toward Luminos's signature aesthetic. To almost everyone in that room, it looked expensive and beautiful. Clyde, watching from the edge of the crowd with his chest already expanding, practically radiated approval. Naomi lifted it with her fingertips. She turned it once. She checked the clasp, wrong, not Luminos's standard mechanism. She tested the weight, slightly off, the gold not quite what it claimed to be. She checked the setting, the depth, the interior curve where Luminos pieces carried a hidden maker's mark that could not be replicated without knowing exactly where to look. There was no mark. She found the certificate tucked beneath the velvet lining. Authentication format that Luminos had retired years ago. Serial number pattern that matched the type Renata had flagged that morning. Her husband had given the owner of Luminos Fine Jewelry a counterfeit Luminos necklace on her birthday, in front of 200 people. Clyde moved forward, glass raised. "Now, that is a gift with some taste. Maybe now she'll understand quality." He looked at Naomi the way he always looked at her, with the benevolent tolerance of someone who has decided you are sweet but limited and see no reason to revisit that conclusion. Simone's glass came up. The smile over its rim was not for the room, it was for Naomi specifically, and it said, "You can see what this is, you cannot stop it." Marcus, buoyed, lifted his own glass and delivered the second blow with the casual confidence of a man who believes his timing is perfect. "While I have everyone here, I think we should stop pretending." He glanced around the room with the expression of a man making a regretful but necessary announcement. "Naomi and I have grown apart. I'm asking for a separation. I need a partner who understands where my life is going, the ambition, the networks, the kind of future my family is building." His eyes moved to Simone for less than a second. Everyone saw it. The room held its breath. No one spoke. Some guests looked at their plates. Some looked at Naomi. One woman near the back, a board member of the charity foundation, a person who had known Naomi for 3 years, covered her mouth with her hand, and it was not clear whether the gesture was from shock or from the effort of staying silent. Naomi stood beneath the chandeliers of a party her husband had engineered as a stage set for her humiliation, holding a fake necklace, wearing her mother's real one, and she let the silence do its full work. Then she spoke. "Before I respond," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room without being raised, "I'd like to have the necklace appraised." Marcus laughed, the specific laugh of a man who finds the request beneath him. "If that makes you feel better." Clyde waved his hand. "Let her have it." Women and their reassurances. Simone leaned toward Naomi's ear, close enough for the words to be private, but spoken with the confidence of someone who expects to never answer for them. Some women need proof before they can accept they've been replaced. Naomi looked at her. Steady still, nothing on her face that wasn't chosen. Then from near the charity auction table a chair moved. Bernard Osei rose, unhurried, and buttoned his jacket. He spoke with the quiet authority of a man who had spent decades speaking last and being believed, if Mrs. Ashby permits. I'm already here as the appraisal consultant for this evening's auction items. I can conduct a preliminary authentication now. For the first time since she'd entered the room, something crossed Simone Garrett's face that was not performance. Marcus, still smiling, gestured toward the velvet box. "Go ahead, then." Naomi placed the necklace in the box and slid it toward Bernard. The lid closed with a soft click. In that click, the evening became something else entirely. Bernard Osei did not hurry. That was the first thing the room noticed. He put on white gloves with the unhurried care of a man who understood that the quality of his work depended on not being rushed by other people's urgency. He laid the necklace on a black velvet inspection cloth. He opened his case and removed a loop, a light pen, a thin measurement tool. He began with the clasp. Marcus said something about surgery under his breath. A few guests gave weak smiles. Naomi stood still. Bernard checked the clasp, the setting, the stone, the inner curve where the maker's mark lived, or in this case, didn't. He picked up the certificate. He entered the serial number into Luminos's secure authentication database on his tablet. The tablet produced a soft sound. Bernard's face did not change in any dramatic way. It only became more serious, which in a man like Bernard Osei was more final than most people's outrage. He looked up. "My preliminary determination is that this piece is not authentic Luminos fine jewelry." The ballroom went completely silent. Marcus blinked. "What?" "This necklace was not produced by Luminos." Bernard placed it down with the same careful hands he'd used to pick it up. "The clasp is not to our standard. The stone is presented as natural. The visual indicators are consistent with lab-grown material. The gold content stamp does not match the declared weight. The setting imitates Luminos's design language, but the proportions are incorrect." He paused. "This is a copy." Clyde Ashby Sr. stepped forward, face flushing. "Impossible. My son purchased that from a private dealer." "A reputable, then your son was given false information," Bernard said. "Or the seller knew exactly what he was selling." A wave of whispers moved through the room. Marcus raised a hand, trying to reclaim control. "I was clearly deceived. Private dealers can be dishonest. This isn't." "Who introduced you to the dealer?" Naomi asked. Marcus opened his mouth, stopped. No answer came. Bernard picked up the certificate again and studied it longer. He rubbed the edge between two gloved fingers. He checked the seal under his light pen. And then something shifted in his expression. Not shock, because Bernard had seen too much for shock. Recognition. "Mrs. Ashby." His voice was lower now. "This certificate pattern is familiar to me. The format is retired. Luminos stopped using it years ago. But it's not only retired, this specific copying style has appeared in other documents under review by our risk division." He looked at her directly. "Documents connected to lender verification requests. The kind that support loan collateral." The kind of silence that followed that sentence was a different quality from the silence before it. Earlier, the room had been quiet from shock. Now it was quiet from something closer to understanding. The specific stillness that descends when a gathering of intelligent people suddenly realizes they have been watching a much larger thing than the one that was presented to them. Clyde's face had gone from red to a color with no good name. Adaize, near the auction table, typed something on her phone without looking up. Bernard continued. "I cannot make a legal determination from this table, but I can say this. The certificate format used here is identical to one being examined in connection with several lender verifications. Verifications that reference luxury collateral under the Luminos name, collateral for which Luminos has no authentication record." He looked at the necklace lying on its velvet cloth. "This piece may be the one that brought the pattern into the open." Marcus looked at his father. His father was already looking at the door. Naomi set down the champagne glass she had not drunk from. She looked at the room, at the 200 guests who had come to watch her be reduced, who had held their drinks and watched and said nothing. who were now holding those same drinks and watching something altogether different unfold. She looked at Simone, whose smile had gone somewhere it couldn't come back from. She looked at Clyde, who was working his mouth around words that kept dissolving before they formed. And then she looked at Marcus, just Marcus, and she said, with the same calm that had carried her through 4 years of dinner tables and dismissals and small, precise cruelties dressed up as family, "The party is over." Nobody argued. The quartet did not play again. The untouched birthday cake stood at the center of the room like a monument to the evening that had been planned and the one that had actually happened. Guests collected their things in the particular quiet of people who understand they have witnessed something real and are still deciding what it means. Naomi walked to a private room off the ballroom. A daisy followed. Bernard carried the velvet box with both hands. Renata appeared from the corridor with a tablet, an evidence pouch, and the focused calm of someone who had been waiting for this signal for hours. Marcus tried to follow. Adaze turned to face him with one raised palm. Not another step. He looked past her at Naomi. "You cannot use lawyers to avoid a conversation." Naomi stopped. She turned just enough to look at him. "You asked for separation in front of 200 people, she said. "You'll get the proper process." She went into the side room and closed the door. Inside, it was quiet in a different way. The quiet of a space that belongs to the people in it. Naomi sat. Her hands trembled slightly, which she permitted because there was no one here who would use it against her. Adaze opened her portfolio. "We move carefully. What happened tonight is not only a marital matter, it's a public record." Bernard sealed the necklace and certificate into separate evidence pouches. He labeled each one with time, location, and description, with the care of a man who has seen many small mistakes let many large liars go free. Adaze made 2 calls. The first was to Luminos's internal risk division. The second was to a forensic accounting firm that had already been quietly reviewing verification requests connected to Ashby Holdings. When she set the phone down, her expression had changed. "Tell me," Naomi said. "Luminos's risk division has 4 pending lender verifications," Adaze said. "All 4 reference luxury collateral certified as authentic Luminos pieces. Luminos has no record of issuing any of the 4 certificates." She paused. "The forensic accountant found those assets listed against Ashby Holdings credit lines. The collateral values are inflated significantly." Bernard looked grim. "And the necklace certificate matches the copied format." Renata stopped typing. The room understood what this meant. The necklace had not been a simple fake gift, a cheap cruelty wrapped in velvet. It was a thread. And the thread, when pulled, led somewhere much larger and much darker than one man's betrayal of one woman on one evening. From beyond the door, Marcus' voice rose in the hallway. "She is being dramatic. She cannot afford a long legal fight. She will sign whatever I put in front of her." A lower voice, Simone's, answered just clearly enough through the door. She looked broken. "Keep pressing." Naomi opened her eyes. She stood up. She walked to the table where the evidence bag sat, and she sealed it herself, pressing the closure with her own hand. "He gave me a lie on my birthday," she said. Her voice was quiet. Everyone in the room was listening. "Let's find out how many he inherited." Clyde Ashby Sr. had never in his life been made to wait in a lobby. He made other people wait in lobbies. That was the nature of the man. He arrived late to signal importance, left early to signal demand, and treated the space between doors as a staging area for his own performance. So when he walked into Lumino's fine jewelry headquarters, the morning after the birthday party with Marcus, 2 steps behind him, and Simone Garrett, half a step behind that, and found himself standing at a reception desk being looked at by a woman who was not impressed and not afraid, something in him went sideways before he could correct it. "Tell whoever is in charge that Clyde Ashby is here," he said. "Your appraiser publicly humiliated my family last night, and I intend to have a conversation about what that costs." The receptionist looked at her screen. "Mr. Ashby, you're expected." He blinked. Expected. 2 security doors opened. A woman named Renata stepped out. She led them down a corridor of pale wood and soft light, past glass-fronted display rooms and framed archive drawings and employees who looked up as the group passed. Marcus noticed something. The employees were not looking at Clyde. They were looking toward the elevator at the far end of the hall, the way people look when they're waiting for someone they know. The boardroom held a long table. A daisy sat near the center with her portfolio. Bernard stood beside a display screen. Naomi's highest-ranking corporate counsel, a woman named Dr. Priya Mensa, sat at the head of the legal team, 53 years old, the kind of compose that comes from having been right in difficult rooms for a very long time. A forensic accountant named Roland had his laptop open. A senior representative from Ashby Holdings Primary Lending Bank sat with a sealed file in front of him, his face carrying the particular neutrality of a man who has already decided something and is here to deliver it. Two Luminos board members sat at the far end of the table. Clyde stopped at the door. For the first time since Naomi had known him, he looked less certain than the room. The elevator doors opened. Naomi stepped out. She was not wearing the burgundy dress from last night. She was not wearing anything that belonged to the version of herself she'd been performing in the Ashby household for 4 years. She wore a white suit, clean, precise, the kind of white that does not apologize. Her mother's pendant, her shoulders level. The expression of a woman who has not arrived to explain herself. Every person in the hallway lowered their voice slightly as she passed. "Madame Voss," Priya said. Marcus went completely still. Clyde looked from Priya to Naomi, then back to Priya, waiting for the correction that did not come. He laughed, one short, sharp sound that was supposed to establish skepticism and instead established fear. "What is this? Why is she?" Priya's voice was clear and unhurried. "Mrs. Naomi Voss Ashby is the majority owner and chief executive officer of Luminos Fine Jewelry." The room did not move. Marcus's face drained color the way expensive things drain. Slowly, then all at once. Clyde looked around the table, at the board members, the banker, the forensic accountant, a Daisy, Bernard. He looked at them all, and not one of them corrected Priya. Not one of them showed surprise. This was not news to anyone in this room. It was only news to him. Simone's hand slipped from Marcus's arm. Naomi walked to the head of the table and stood behind the chair Clyde had expected some stranger to occupy. She looked at him, and in that look she carried every dinner where he had laughed at her pendant, every speech about Luminos being beyond ordinary people, every time he had praised the brand while looking through the woman who owned it. "You told me once," she said, her voice gentle, "that Luminos was for people beyond my reach." Clyde's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Marcus stepped forward. "You lied to me." Naomi turned to him. There was pain in her face that she did not hide, because hiding it now would be a concession to the idea that she had something to be ashamed of. "I told you I worked with Luminos. You decided that meant I was small. You never asked what that meant. You never cared enough to learn the difference between my job title and my name on the ownership documents." Marcus flinched. She remembered how many times she had come close to telling him. The evening she had almost said it over dinner. The morning she'd come back from a board meeting and found him telling his father on the phone that she worked at some jewelry place, nothing serious. The night he'd said, half-joking, that powerful wives made men look insecure, and she'd smiled and said nothing, and gone to bed and lay there in the dark, wondering if the waiting would ever end. It was ending now. "Please begin," Naomi said to Bernard. He placed the birthday necklace certificate on the display screen. Beside it, 4 more documents appeared, each carrying Luminos's name, each bearing a seal that looked official to anyone outside the company. "All 5 certificates are forged," Bernard said. "The first came from the necklace presented to Mrs. Voss Ashby last night. The other 4 were attached to asset records submitted by Ashby Holdings in support of loan collateral." Clyde's voice was hard. "That is not possible." Roland turned his laptop screen toward the room. "Your company listed several luxury items as collateral for credit extensions and insurance-backed valuations. The certificates used to authenticate those items claim Luminos verification. Luminos has no record of issuing any of them." He opened a file. "The valuations on record exceed the actual worth of the items by an average of 400%. The banker opened his sealed folder. His voice was the voice of a man delivering an institutional decision. "Mr. Ashby, the bank requires immediate verification of all collateral listed in your loan documentation. Pending that verification, your credit line is suspended, effective this morning." Clyde gripped the back of a chair. Marcus looked at the screen. He looked at his father. He looked at the line items, the luxury assets Clyde had used as collateral, the inflated values, the certificates bearing a company name that the quiet woman across this table owned. He watched it land. Watched understanding arrive in his father's face, not as shock, but as the specific expression of someone whose construction has been revealed. The family fortune that Marcus had chosen over love, the status he'd sacrificed his marriage to protect, the future he'd thought Simone represented. It was paper, painted gold, but paper. Naomi's voice was even. "Luminos will cooperate fully with the bank, the insurers, and any investigative process. We will also terminate all trade credit extensions connected to Ashby Holdings pending verification of records." Marcus frowned. "What credit extensions?" Daisy answered before Naomi could. "The extensions that kept your father's supplier network from defaulting 8 months ago." Marcus turned to Naomi slowly. She held his gaze. She watched him understand it. The phone call she'd made at midnight, the quiet supplier reviews, the structured extensions she'd arranged through a Luminos subsidiary, giving Ashby Holdings breathing room they didn't know, came from her. She had done it because Marcus still loved his family, and she had still loved Marcus, and she had believed that protecting the people your spouse loved was part of what marriage meant. She had not known she was giving oxygen to a lie. "I thought I was helping your family through a difficult season," she said. "I didn't know I was helping them hide what was underneath it." Clyde said nothing. "You cannot do this," Marcus said. "I'm not doing anything to you," Naomi said. "I'm only stopping what I was doing. For you." The sentence landed with the specific weight of something that cannot be argued with, because it is too simple and too true. Outside the boardroom, as the banker's phone buzzed with the formal credit freeze confirmation, Simone Garrett sat in the lobby and looked at the Luminos lobby and understood for the first time that she had been trying to step into a place she had fundamentally misunderstood. She had looked at Naomi's quiet, her simple clothes, her small pendant, and she had seen limitation. She had not seen design. She had not seen the difference between a woman who had nothing and a woman who had chosen to carry what she had without announcement. That distinction had been the entire story. She would spend the next weeks trying to delete herself from it. The party footage had already spread, not because anyone had planted it, because 200 people had phones and a story worth telling. The clip paused most often on her face. The moment she'd leaned toward Naomi's ear with her champagne glass, the particular shape of her expression. Someone had circled it. The caption that attached itself required no embellishment. She smiled at the woman whose company she was in, while her boyfriend tried to humiliate the woman who owned it. Brand partnerships suspended. Charity board invitations quietly withdrawn. The Elegant Consultants Network turned out to be largely built on proximity to the Ashby name, and the Ashby name was no longer a foundation worth building on. She called Marcus once. He answered, and they had the conversation people have when the fiction they built together has run out of believers. She had called him untouchable. He had called her certain. They had been wrong about each other in matching and symmetrical ways, and now there was nothing left to be wrong about together. Marcus came to Luminos headquarters 3 weeks later. He came in the rain, which Naomi noticed because it was the same weather as the night she'd first met him. He stood outside the glass doors in a coat that no longer fit the way it used to. Or perhaps it fit the same and he was the thing that had changed. And he waited for 40 minutes before Renata called to let Naomi know. Naomi came down. She stood under the umbrella her security officer held for her, and she looked at Marcus standing in the rain without one. The mirror of it, him outside, her protected, the sky treating them exactly the way their choices had, was not something she had arranged. It was simply how it had worked out. 5 minutes, she said. He talked quickly, the way people talk when they know the time is real. He said he'd been confused. He said his father's voice had been louder in his head than his own conscience. He said Simone had made him feel like ambition and cruelty were the same thing. And he had believed her because believing her was easier than examining himself. He said, "I didn't know your world was this big." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. "The world was never the issue, Marcus. Your heart was." He looked down at the papers Adeze held in the portfolio. The separation agreement, the civil notices, the clauses that activated the moment he'd announced their marriage end in front of 200 witnesses. "Did you ever love me?" he asked. The rain came down steady and cold. Naomi thought about the trade credit extensions she'd arranged in the middle of the night to keep his family's business from collapse. She thought about the dinner parties where she'd sat quiet, while Clyde praised her company to the room and looked past her, like she was furniture. She thought about every time she had almost told him the truth, and had folded the truth back into herself and waited one more season, believing love would eventually grow wide enough to hold it. "Yes," she said, "enough to hide my crown. Not enough to let you stand on it." Marcus closed his eyes. Naomi turned and walked to the glass doors. They opened as she reached them. She didn't look back. Behind her, Marcus stood on the wet pavement holding papers that ended the life he'd thought was his, in the rain outside the empire he'd spent years trying to reach without knowing his wife owned it. Inside, the lobby was warm and lit. Renata was already walking toward her with the evening's agenda. Bernard was upstairs finalizing authentication statements for 3 separate legal submissions. Adeze had a call in 40 minutes with the insurance investigative team. The work continued, as it always had. 6 months after the birthday party, Luminos Fine Jewelry announced the Lorraine collection. The launch was held at headquarters, which had been transformed for the evening not with loud glamour, but with the specific beauty of things that have earned their place. Garden flowers. In small clay vases, warm light over the display cases, the quiet hum of a room full of people who understood what they were there to witness. At the center of the display was a necklace, not heavy, not loud. shaped with the same gentle curve as the pendant Naomi had worn through every dismissal, every silence, every dinner where a man praised her company while looking through her face. Beside it, in a simple frame, hung the original sketch, Lorraine Voss's hand, the uneven, beautiful lines, the note at the bottom in her mother's handwriting. Naomi stood behind the curtain near the stage and looked at the room. Adaze was there, Renata, Bernard, Jerome, Dr. Priya Mensa, the people who had known what she was and protected her right to reveal it on her own terms. "Ready?" Renata asked. Naomi touched her mother's pendant. She thought about the question Marcus had asked in the rain, not the one he'd asked out loud, but the one underneath it, the one he hadn't been able to form, the one that went, "Was any of it real?" All of it was real. That was the unbearable and clarifying truth. The love had been real. The grief had been real. The years of patience and the hope she'd carried like a lit candle through seasons that kept trying to put it out. All real. Real things could be wrong. Real love could be given to people who treated it as inventory. She was done grieving what he'd done with what she'd given him. She walked onto the stage. The room became still. No one saw Daniel Ashby's quiet wife. No one saw Clyde Ashby's overlooked daughter-in-law. No one saw the woman Simone Garrett had assumed was small. They saw Naomi Voss, who wore her mother's pendant and had built her mother's dream into something the world came to, not the other way around. She stood at the podium and looked at the room and said, "My mother taught me that real value survives pressure. She taught me that what you make with your hands outlasts everything anyone says about your name." She paused. Tonight, this collection is for every woman who was mistaken for decoration when she was, in fact, the architecture. The applause that followed was the slow kind, the kind that starts because people feel something true and need a moment to agree with each other, that they felt it. Naomi did not smile because justice had been served. Justice was too small a word for what had happened here. She smiled because she was no longer hiding. Because the pendant at her throat and the name above the door were finally the same person, visible together, in the same room on the same night. Afterward, Adaze found her near the display case. She held a slim folder. "The divorce was finalized this morning," Adaze said. Naomi was quiet for a moment. Did he say anything? Only that he was sorry. Naomi looked at the necklace under the glass, the one shaped like her mother's design, the one that looked like what it was. "So am I," she said. "But I'm not going back." She announced before the evening ended that a portion of the Lorraine Collection's proceeds would fund legal support for women rebuilding after financial manipulation, public humiliation, and betrayal of trust. The room went very quiet when she said it, the particular quiet that follows something that lands in more than one person at once. Near the back, a young woman named Imani, who worked in Luminos's event coordination department, pressed her fingers to her mouth and looked at the stage with the expression of someone watching a door open that she had stopped believing was a door. That was the thing about Naomi Voss. She had spent years being the kept secret of the most powerful room in the building. She had hidden what she was because she wanted love that didn't depend on it. She had given that love freely and had it returned as performance and strategy and a fake necklace in a velvet box. But the hiding was over. And the thing about a woman who has spent years being still and patient and underestimated is that when she finally stands in the light, she doesn't stand in it for the people who missed her. She stands in it for every Imani near the back of every room, watching and waiting and wondering if this is something that can happen to them. It can. That is the whole message. That is all of it. Not that loyalty is strength, though it is. Not that patience pays, though sometimes it does. But that what you build in the dark, what you build quietly, consistently, without applause, in the back rooms of borrowed spaces with your mother's tools and your grandmother's hands, that thing is yours. It survives. It outlasts the people who didn't ask about it. It outlasts the names they put on top of you. It outlasts the velvet boxes and the fake certificates and the boardrooms full of men praising what they don't know belongs to the woman beside them. Clyde Ashby never got his meeting with Luminos's executive board. He got something else instead. An empty house, a suspended credit line, a family name that now rang differently in every room where people knew what rooms were for. Marcus Ashby started over, quietly, in work that did not require anyone to know his name. Some days at lunch, he watched the old clip on his phone, Bernard opening the velvet box, the necklace on the velvet cloth, Naomi's face showing nothing. He watched it not as punishment, but as a record of the moment he had been offered, the chance to understand what he had and had chosen something shinier and smaller instead. He had given the owner of Luminos Fine Jewelry a counterfeit Luminos necklace. He would spend a long time understanding what that meant. Naomi Voss touched her mother's pendant in the warm light of a room full of people who knew her name and closed her eyes for one breath. Just one. Then she went back to work. The Lorraine collection sold out its first run in 11 days. The legal aid fund that Naomi established received more applications in its first month than the team had modeled for the entire first year. A daisy brought the numbers to Naomi's office on a Tuesday morning and set them on the desk without commentary because the numbers said everything that needed saying. Renata, who had worked beside Naomi for 14 years and had watched her sign acquisition, papers and forensic authorizations and divorce decrees with the same careful hand, asked her once. In the quiet of a late office evening, the building nearly empty, the display cases glowing in the corridor, whether she regretted keeping the secret as long as she had. Naomi considered the question honestly. "I regret that it didn't work," she said. "I don't regret trying. My mother spent 30 years making beautiful things that nobody connected to a name that mattered, and she never once thought that was a failure. She thought it was the work." She looked at the pendant at her own throat. "I thought if I waited long enough, love would become the kind that didn't need me to shrink. I was wrong about Marcus, but I wasn't wrong about the waiting." Renata nodded. "What would you tell a woman who is doing the same thing now?" Renata asked. "Hiding what she is, hoping to be loved for who she is." Naomi was quiet for a moment. "I'd tell her to watch carefully," she said. "Not for signs that he doesn't love her. For signs that he's curious about her. Real love wants to know. It asks questions. It notices when the answer it gets is smaller than the person giving it." She paused. "If no one asking, you're not being loved. You're being managed." Renata was quiet. "And if that's what's happening," Naomi continued, "stop waiting for the love to grow wide enough. Build something wide enough yourself. Then decide from that width who deserves to stand inside it with you." She closed her laptop. "My mother knew," Naomi said finally. "She always knew." She pressed that pendant into my hand and she said, "What you make outlasts what anyone says about your name." And she was talking about jewelry, and she was talking about everything else at the same time. She stood. I just had to live long enough to understand which everything she meant. Outside, the city moved through its evening, the lights of it visible through the luminous windows, indifferent and ongoing and full of women in rooms where someone had decided what they were worth without asking them. Some of those women were building something. Most of them were building it quietly. All of them, when the time came, would have to decide whether to keep the secret or let it speak. Naomi Voss had let her speak. She hoped they would too. For every woman who hid her crown to make room for someone else's comfort. The crown was always yours.